Welcome to the Bronchiectasis and NTM Association podcast, where we're here to share valuable insight from leading health experts, heartwarming stories from people living with bronchiectasis and NTM lung disease, and the latest in health research and treatment. Please subscribe, follow us on social media, and visit bronchandntm.org to learn more. Just a quick note before we get started. This podcast series is intended for educational purposes only and is not suitable for medical advice. Please consult your medical provider if you have any questions. In today's episode, we have another truly inspiring guest joining us. She is a mom of two and wife who faced the challenges of living with a diagnosis that made her question her career aspirations. Once believing she would never work full-time again, she has navigated the complexities of balancing a demanding job and family life with grace and resilience. Join us as we explore her remarkable journey to diagnosis, how she has since transformed her life, evolving from doubt to determination. She'll share her ups and downs of juggling motherhood and a full-time career, offering insight and encouragement for anyone and everyone facing similar challenges. So welcome, Stephany. It is so great to have you join us today. Can you just dive right in and tell us about your journey?
I was a 27-week preemie back in 1983. So I was the baby that likely was not going to make it. We didn't have a lot of what we have now in terms of lung care, like surfactant and discoveries like that. And so not only did I make it, but once I did, they didn't know if I would live past the age of 5. And so I kept having to kind of make these milestones. Stanford Medical Center, when I was at the age of 1, used me in a research study to see if moving to sea level could help lung development. And so my parents, I lived in New Mexico. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My parents moved our family to California to participate in this research study, and their study proved true, and I survived. And so I've had an interesting life journey. I was pretty sick when I was a small child. I was on oxygen full time until almost the age of 3. But then my health really leveled off. I was very, very fortunate. I only spent 90 days in the NICU, which there's a lot of variables as to why I only spent 90 days. My father is a physical therapist by trade. And back then, physical therapists did a lot of respiratory therapy. So I literally went home with a respiratory therapist in my home. I came home with a lot of bells and whistles and machinery. And then my dad actually performed my respiratory care at home on a regular basis. And so some physicians at the time, my dad reports, said if it were up to them, I would have been in the NICU over a year. But thanks to my dad having the skill set and knowledge he does, I got to go home and be home, which was a really, really big deal. So if you look at my life, up until about the age of 5, I was sick a lot, even 6, missed a lot of school, etc. But then if you look at kind of the middle of my life in terms of adolescence, things really leveled off and I was able to be pretty healthy. I ran cross country. I grew up in Colorado, so I ran cross country in Leadville, Colorado, which is the highest elevation town. And I ran a race there, probably with pretty low lung function at baseline. So I did a lot of things that they thought I would never do. Went to college. I found my husband in college, got married. I have 2 children. And so if I think back on my life, I've been able to do a lot of really cool things. Fast forward to around the age of 30, things started to change with my health. I've never been typical in terms of lung function. I get out of breath easily when I, walk fast or run, right? But that was always the norm for me. But when I was in my early 30s, I started to notice difficulty breathing, especially at night when I would be laying down. And we were living in Northeast Texas at the time. So I thought, oh, it's just probably allergies or, oh, I'm getting, older or whatnot. So I didn't do anything about it. And it wasn't until I got a pretty significant kidney infection and they did imaging where they saw my lungs and they had compared it, they were really thorough and compared it to my last lung imaging and noted what they called like emphysematic changes in the lungs, which prompted me to go to a pulmonologist. So in the beginning of kind of my journey in adulthood, I was diagnosed with COPD at the age of 31. And I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I was starting to really not feel well. It was starting to affect my activity of daily living. I had two very small children, a toddler and a baby at the time. And I knew I needed to be all in with parenting, and energy was getting difficult. I was even having dips in my oxygen level at times. And so I knew something wasn't right. And so that's when I found the COPD Foundation, actually. I joined a support group, and I knew everybody in the group was older than me, except for a choice few people. So I kind of felt like an outlier from the beginning, because I thought, wow, I need to learn how to live with this diagnosis, not what's my trajectory to die. What stage am I? I did not like discussion like that, because for me, I joined support groups to really learn, okay, I have this thing. I need to keep going with this thing. Right. At the time, I was treated in kind of a smaller town in a smaller area. And I started barreling through medications. So like I was on this inhaler and that inhaler and the options at the time. And I was starting to run out of options. And so I knew that I needed another opinion and more help and more support. So I sought medical care at kind of a specialty respiratory hospital. And there's a few really prominent ones in our nation. And I went to one of those, right? Because I knew I was young and I needed more treatment than you're running out of options. So I went to this specialty hospital. Again, young, a career woman, young children, lots to do, but really starting to not feel well. They did a couple weeks of extensive testing. And that's when I found out that my diagnosis is actually bronchopulmonary dysplasia, or BPD, which is something I was diagnosed with in infancy from being a preemie, but it's something that I never grew out of and still had prominent symptoms of that kind of came out and even more so in my early 30s. And so I had a diagnosis of COPD. It's very much like COPD, and I still have the diagnosis of COPD on my medical record. The better term for it in terms of my journey is BPD, but it's COPD-like. And so they did a lot of testing, and that's when I found out I also have a diagnosis of bronchiectasis, something I'd never been diagnosed with, something I didn't know about, and something that was new and a lot of people still don't know about. When I mention it, everyone says, they've heard of COPD, they've heard of severe asthma. Those are on my diagnoses as well. But most folks have not heard of bronchiectasis and don't know what it is. And so for me, I had to learn about airway clearance. I have a shaker vest like folks with cystic fibrosis have. I have hypertonic saline and a nebulizer I use on a normal basis. I have flutter valves for when I'm at work to do airway clearance. And it all kind of started to make sense, the bronchiectasis piece to my care, because when I would get sick, I wouldn't get over it for a long time. I'd have more mucus than, my husband and I can get the same cold, and it just looks so different in my body. And so we found out how much airway clearance just is so important in my care, not only on the regular, but especially when I'm sick with a virus. So the bronchiectasis piece was a really important discovery in my care. I am on medications on a regular basis for the bronchiectasis piece, in addition to the other concomitant lung diseases I have.
That is quite a journey that you've been on. Since being diagnosed, have you been able to work, or has your disease changed your career path?
This is my first time to be able to work full time since 2019 because of health reasons. And so I feel like my medical team and I finally are on like a really good pattern of care, and I'm on a good medication plan. There's newer medications out that are FDA approved that I'm able to be on that I couldn't be on even a few years ago because they weren't ready and out yet or accessible yet. And so I'm finally able to go back to work. I'm working full time. And I'm working in the public school setting. I do evaluations and I do IEP meetings, and I really, really love being back into my field. I love being a speech pathologist. So
That's awesome. That sounds very rewarding.
yeah, and I'm a mom too, so like my greatest role in this life will always be being a mother first, but I really love my field, and it's been tough. It wasn't in my plan to have to retire in my 30s or like have to stop. And so I'm 42, but I spent a lot of my 30s very, very sick. And so I'm very thankful for just medical care, and then thankful to be able to help promote awareness with foundations and entities like y'all.
So to kind of go into your story a little bit, just out of curiosity, with you being so young, how old are your children?
Yeah. So now I'm 42. My oldest is 12, my daughter. She's in 7th grade. And my youngest is 10, and he is in 5th grade. So I've been sick since my kids can remember. My daughter actually remembers a time when I was relatively healthy. She has a really keen memory. And then she remembers the times when, like back in 2020, my husband had to take a full year off of work. I was going to be placed in a nursing home, but then COVID happened, and the nursing home I was to be slated to got locked down the day before I was supposed to be admitted. So that's how sick I was. My husband had to take a year off because I required 24-hour care. I was in a wheelchair. And during my journey, I've had 4 different times where I've gone down so hard with like repetitive hospital stays, et cetera, that I've been wheelchair bound, home health bound. Someone's giving me a bath at home. So 4 times I've had to come up from that level of decline. With all of that, my kids, it's been tough on them for sure. They learned when my son was 4, he knew how to run and go get the neighbors for help. He knew how to dial 911 at an early age. And I would say my kids probably had to grow up beyond their years a little early, having a sick parent. With that, they learned pretty quickly that I do have significant needs, and those needs take time. But they hang out with me while I do those things. So like when I'm doing my shaker vest and my nebs, which when I'm sick is multiple times a day. When I'm not sick, it's a couple times a day. They come hang out, and that's when we turn on the Netflix and like watch shows. And the noise, I actually sleep. I have it next to me. I sleep out with a non-invasive ventilator at night. And when they crawl in bed with us, it's no thing to them. They're used to the noise. I think anybody else would see what we do and what they're used to and be like, wow, that's noisy, or that's really different. But my kids, it's just normal routine for them. So that's a really interesting question, because I feel like they knew that the common cold doesn't look the same for me. The last time I caught a cold was in August, and I was in the ICU and I was intubated from getting a cold. So they know that when I get sick, I do it up really well. But they also know that it looks different for them. Another thing as a family we've had to really talk through, because my kids are in public school, my husband teaches, and now I'm also out in public more because I'm more stable than I used to be. But another thing is that we've made a pact. None of us feel bad for getting mom sick, right? Like we can't help it. It wasn't your fault or someone's fault. Illness happens, right? And so that was another thing we had to kind of establish in our family, because I could see it really early on that like my kids would bring something home from school and they'd be like, great, you got mommy sick. No, mommy just got sick. It's not anybody's fault. And so there's some boundaries in terms of, emotional boundaries we've had to set for our family. But then also they just kind of learned early on that this is what it looks like for me. I will say my kids, especially my daughter, my son, not as much, but my daughter went through some stages of, I wish lung disease didn't exist. Right. Now she's like, okay, this exists. This is our life. And we accommodate our life because it exists and it's not going away. Right. But I think early on, she used to ask Santa for it to go away. It was really tough. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when the kids are sick, is there anything special that you like to do? Like, do you try to wear a mask? Do you just wash your hands more? What kind of things do you do?
Yeah, so we do when my kids are sick, we my husband will kick in for that close care more often than me if it's the option. My husband also works. He used to be a football coach, so he used to not be home a lot. It was very busy. So usually it was just me kicking in, but now he's not coaching anymore, and so usually like when kiddo is like running fever and really sick, we do a good job of communicating with who's doing what. If I'm not sick, which for some reason illnesses usually start with me, like when someone brings something home, it's typically me bringing it home or me catching it first. But we wash hands a lot in our house. We did mask during COVID in our house, like the height of COVID. It's still COVID, it's not gone. But we did mask during COVID, but I was the first one to catch COVID in our house too, which is interesting because I wasn't going much places but doctor's appointments back then. But I caught it first. And then I gave it to my family. But yeah, we take probably more precautions than other families do, depending on our life rigor, but also just knowing, hey, kiddo's got a fever and it's probably pretty contagious. You know, my husband kicks in for close care. I kind of stay away. But there are times that it can't be helped, and that I'm parenting and exposing myself, knowing, okay, this is probably coming. Yeah.
When people have a chronic lung illness, a lot of people think that it just affects people who are older. We think of the person who is 65 and older. We think of that with COPD. We think of that with bronchiectasis. And so, what would you tell somebody who is going through, the new diagnosis when you were in your 30s and having small children? What words of advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I wish somebody would have told me, um, just, you can navigate this. When I was 31 and I wasn't fully properly diagnosed at the time, but when I was young and had young kids, I had an agenda in my mind. Life was going to look like this. I was going to spend this many years doing this in my career. With our kids, we were going to do this. I mean, everything had a plan. And when I received the diagnoses that I did, that plan had to be adjusted, and that still needed to be okay. And so I needed to experience the emotions of this and these medical diagnoses the way that I did back then. It was survival mode for me at age 31. But now looking back, I wish I would have basked in the framework of, you can do this and be a mom. You can do this and be a wife. You can do this and have a career. Because there were times when I thought my career was over. There were times I felt very isolated because of my age, and still so. I'm 42, but I'm still very young in terms of lung disease. And so I used to have big feelings about that, and I don't really have big feelings about that anymore. And I remember a story of, I used to be on oxygen full time, which is another thing, and I've been able to taper off over time, but I was on 10 liters of oxygen full time back in 2020. And I remember having to have it with me all the time. And I was on so many liters that I couldn't have a typical discreet backpack or something or a purse. I had to have the big old tank, and it would run out. And I felt like everybody was staring at me. Number one, not everybody was staring at me. They were doing their own thing. even though I thought they were. The other thing is I met one girl who was a year younger than me who had oxygen on. I was going to a pulmonology appointment and she looked so cute. She had these boots on. It was in the middle of winter in Denver, Colorado. So we were like, dressed warmly, but she had these cute boots on and this glitzy looking purse. And she had an oxygen hose. And I looked at her and I said, "Can I tell you something?" She goes, "Yeah." And I said, "You make that oxygen look good, girl." And she goes, "Girl, you do too." And we had this connection that was a 30-something-year-old connection where in that moment we didn't feel alone, probably for the first time. And it was really, really cool. And I posted on social media because I have some folks that follow my journey. I'm pretty open with my health journey on social media. And I posted about not feeling alone for the first time in a lived experience. That is such a big deal. So if I could give younger self, my younger self, or others that are young, I've met people in their 20s with COPD or bronchiectasis. It happens. And so I think I would tell those folks, or even my younger self, you can do good things and great things and be great and do all of the things you thought you were going to do. It just looks different, right? But those things can exist. And then the other thing is to find support. I was terrified to find support because all of the support was older than me, and it still largely is older than me, right? But when I connected with that young girl for the first time, it changed my mindset. It changed my framing in my head. That moment and that girl made me feel okay, right? Which was really cool. Yeah.
So with your journey and that pivotal moment, tell me a little bit about your Facebook group that you have and how you're open about sharing your journey. I think that takes a lot of courage to be able to do.
Yeah. So it was actually after I met that girl and was like, "Girl, you make oxygen look good. And look at your boots." And then I felt kind of pretty too, right? And I thought oxygen was not pretty. Like I was like, "Nope, this thing I have to lug around," until I saw how well she wore it. And I was like, "Okay, yeah, wait, I can be that too." And so it was really great. So after I met her, I created a Facebook group called Adults with Bronchopulmonary Dysplasia, because everything you read online, or the majority of what you read online, is based on kids. Parents have preemie kiddos even today who are very, very sick and need support from other preemie parents. But the research is largely in babies and young children, which makes sense, right? And so I knew there had to be more folks like me out there. And for a little while, I was afraid to find them. When I was 31 and first told I had COPD and I was barreling through meds and all this stuff, there's a little bit of actually, I can't say a little bit, a lot bit of an avoidance journey there. I didn't want to accept it was happening or that it's happened. I worked more and took on more hours, but I felt more sick. So that did make sense. But I did all of these things emotionally that I felt I needed to avoid that it was happening. And so I had to get into a place of acceptance, and not necessarily acceptance like, "I love having lung disease. Go lung disease." Not necessarily that, but I had to accept it to a level of, some days I'm going to be mad at it. Some days I'm going to be okay with it, but I can still push forward and do all of these things like parent, et cetera, like I've mentioned. And so I had to get in a certain level in my acceptance journey to be able to start talking about it. There's something about, you have to be able to tell yourself that this is happening in order to be able to tell other people that it's happening. Right. So I had to do some inner work with myself before I could even start getting myself out there, talking about it with other people, etc. So that was a lot of work. I have counselors and all kinds of work. It's hard work, and to get to a level where you're ready to talk about it. Right. That's kind of a big deal. So I met that girl who made oxygen really look good, right? And I thought, I wonder if there's other people. And I had told, I had multiple friends say, Steph, try to find others. You couldn't be the only one going through this because BPD is still considered a rare disease. And BPD in adulthood is considered pretty rare. And so I thought I wasn't ready. And finally meeting that girl with the oxygen that day in the pulmonology waiting room made me think, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to start looking for other people, talking about my journey more openly, etc. So I started this Facebook group and it took months for anyone to find it, like months. And so I thought, I started this group. I don't know if anyone's going to join it. Now I'm not sure how many members we have, but there are at least 6 or 7 people that I can count on the top of my head that I know that are adults living with BPD that I know that have found the group. Some of them I found through other groups, like the groups for parents and babies and such. Sometimes there will be an adult that posts in there, hey, anybody met any adults with this? And I'm like, hey, join our group. And like, I don't want to be too overwhelming, but hey, like, glad you're here. I'm so glad. So that's what it took, was just that level of self-acceptance to be able to start talking about it. And then also the desire to have fellowship with other people going through what I was going through. So started the group. I have met some of my now best friends through that group. And I will never forget the first time I FaceTime with someone who I'd met in that group. And I said, can I ask you something? She goes, yeah. And I said, what does it feel like when you flare? Like when you're in acute level flare? And when she described it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's exactly what it feels like. Right. And so when you meet somebody, and now for me, it's been more than just one, but when you meet somebody who gets it to a level that nobody else does, it's so special. It's so special. Not that you want other people to suffer. That's not it. It's that you found somebody that gets it and that you feel safe with to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's just a really beautiful thing. So I've now met some of my closest friends through that group.
Your story is really inspiring. I just love that you have that support group and that you're able to give that.
Yeah. I tell my kids, again, there was a lot of anger, not just with me, but in our house. Like I told you, my daughter used to ask Santa to take away, or we're a Christian family. So she used to pray. And then she was mad at God because she thought God wasn't listening to her prayers. So, we have really normalized in our house, like everyone has something. This is mommy's. And we have so much to still be grateful for, because I was so mad. I was so mad that it was happening. I wanted to will it away, even taking on more work, which made me more sick. Like I was making myself more sick in that avoidance, right? But I don't regret doing those things because I had to go through them to get where I am today with acceptance and with my journey. But it's a big deal to talk about it, just like you said. Like, it's such a big deal. And people don't realize it's a layered onion, yes. But like, people don't realize how just such a big of a deal it is to put yourself out there to join a support group, because then you're admitting it's happening. Like, wait, I was avoiding it was happening. Like, it's so layered. We have something and we can learn from each other through shared experiences, no matter what it is and how we do life and stuff. And so, yeah. And you're giving your kiddos such a gift. I used to think that, I was a bad mom because I missed a baseball game because I was sick and had to be on my ventilator at home, or I was a bad parent because, I had children and now look what they have to go through. None of that is true. That's all really negative talk. That's, when you get in the framework of, finding the beauty in the mess is what we say in our house, and learning, okay, we have this thing. It's here. It's in front of us. We can see it. Here's my ventilator. We can touch it. Right. and learning to do life together with that thing existing instead of denying its existence. It's such a breakthrough thing to happen. And even for my kids, it's been a few years since my daughters asked for Santa or somebody to take away my lung disease. It's a part of us, right? And I think the gift in it is, my kids have learned ultimate acceptance, right? It doesn't mean they're not mad that it exists someday. When I'm in the hospital, it's scary for them and it sucks and all these things. But they have learned so much about appreciation for life and appreciating the healthy times that we have together. And we are so emotionally close as a family because lung disease exists, right? And if it didn't exist, it would be something else, right? And so, so you almost learn to be thankful for something that you used to despise and avoid and curse its name, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes us who we are. It makes us stronger. And there's always a way. There's always a way through. There's always options and, it's point of view. And I love that, you look back at all those times and you learn from those things. And now just to think about how you are supporting other people and how you're helping them grow through that is something that you would not have been able to do unless you went through this journey on your own.
Right. I always, or not always, but I tend to say, because of lung disease, and because of lung disease, I've met some of my best friends. Because of lung disease, I've met people like you and other folks with other, advocacy, entities or foundations that I've gotten to talk to and share my story with. And none of that would have happened if lung disease didn't exist. And so getting to that place in your mind takes so much work, valid low times, valid hard times, but we got to work through them, right? Because we're still going there. The earth is still moving. Things are still moving. My kids are still growing up, right? And so yeah, it's been a beautiful mess.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you found encouragement in our discussion about navigating the complexities of balancing a chronic lung disease, having a career and family, and balancing all of that with grace and resilience. Even in the darkest times, it's important to keep faith and to continue to move forward. Thank you again so much for joining us today, Stephany. Thank you for tuning in to the Bronchiectasis and NTM Association podcast. We hope that you found today's episode helpful and inspiring. You can stay connected by joining our online community, following our social media, and visiting our website for more resources. And of course, subscribe to this podcast and join us next time for more insights, stories, and tips to help you live well with bronchiectasis and NTM lung disease. Until then, thanks for listening and be well.